The freezing rain hammered against Maya's torn jacket as she searched for shelter beneath the overpass on Riverside Drive. Each icy droplet felt like a shard of glass against her exposed neck, the kind of penetrating cold that made her bones ache with a deep, persistent pain she'd grown too familiar with over the past 8 months. Her stomach growled painfully, a hollow, twisting sensation that had become her constant companion, reminding her it had been 2 full days since her last real meal. Stale bread from the convenience store dumpster, hard as a rock and spotted with mold, she'd carefully scraped away. Water from the public fountain that tasted of rust and chemicals and desperation. The cardboard box she called home was soaked through, a useless pile of pulp wedged behind the concrete pillar where she'd hidden it that morning. She'd found it just 3 days ago behind the electronics store on 5th Avenue, double-walled, sturdy, with fragile stamped across the side in fading red letters. It had been perfect. Big enough to curl up inside, thick enough to block the wind. Now it was destroyed, forcing her to keep moving through the industrial district, where the police rarely patrolled, and the homeless could exist in relative peace. Invisible ghosts in a city that preferred not to see them. At 19, Maya had been on the streets for 8 months since her foster family kicked her out the day she aged out of the system. She remembered that morning with painful clarity, Mrs. Peterson's tight smile that never reached her eyes, the 2 garbage bags containing everything Maya owned, tossed onto the front porch like trash, the door closing with a finality that still echoed in her nightmares. "You're an adult now," Mrs. Peterson had said, as if turning 18 somehow equipped her with money, resources, a safety net. Time to make your own way. The streets had taught Maya lessons no classroom ever could. Where to find food, which alleys were safe, how to recognize the difference between someone who would help and someone who would hurt, how to make herself small, invisible, forgettable, how to survive. But they hadn't taken everything. Her certification remained incomplete, abandoned 6 months into the program when her world collapsed, but the skills remained, burned into her memory from those intense months of training before everything fell apart. ABC, airway, breathing, circulation, the assessment protocols, CPR rhythms, symptoms of shock, cardiac events, diabetic emergencies. Professor Martinez's voice still echoed in her head during quiet moments. The knowledge doesn't leave you, Maya. Even when everything else does, this stays. It becomes part of who you are. As Maya rounded the corner near the abandoned textile factory, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles that soaked through the holes in her soles, she nearly tripped over him. Her foot was already descending when her brain registered the obstacle, and she stumbled backward, arms windmilling to catch her balance, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. A teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16, lay motionless on the wet pavement like a discarded doll. His designer sneakers, Nike, the new model she'd seen in store windows, easily $200, and expensive athletic gear created a jarring contrast against the grimy, trash-strewn concrete. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths that barely moved his torso, but his lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Maya's emergency training scream warnings in her mind. Cyanosis, oxygen deprivation, respiratory or circulatory compromise. Her first instinct was to keep walking. Street rule number 1, don't get involved. Mind your business. Survive. She'd seen people beaten for less than stopping to help, seen good Samaritans blamed when situations went bad. But her feet wouldn't move. Something deep in her chest, maybe the last piece of the person she'd been before the streets claimed her, refused to let her walk away from someone who needed help. "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked, dropping to her knees in the puddle beside him, ignoring the icy water that soaked through her already damp jeans within seconds. The pavement was gritty and sharp beneath her knees, small stones biting into her skin, but she barely noticed. Her hands moved automatically through the assessment protocol Professor Martinez had drilled into her head. Check the airway first. She tilted his head back slightly, watching for the rise and fall of his chest. Clear. Then pulse, 2 fingers pressed against his carotid artery, counting. 1 to 20, maybe 1 to 30 beats per minute. Way too fast. Rapid and thready against her fingertips, like a frightened bird beating its wings against a cage. No obvious trauma. No blood pooling beneath him. No defensive wounds or signs of violence. But something was seriously, critically wrong. His skin felt clammy and cold beyond what the rain could explain, covered in a thin sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with exertion. The combination of symptoms clicked together in her mind, like pieces of a puzzle she'd studied countless times. Tachycardia, altered consciousness, diaphoresis, cyanosis, hypoglycemia, diabetic emergency, seizure disorder, drug overdose. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories coming, and we read every single comment. It means the world to us. Maya's hands moved on instinct, muscle memory taking over as she conducted a rapid secondary assessment. She checked for medical alert jewelry, nothing on his wrists, nothing around his neck. She palpated his abdomen gently through his expensive jacket, checking for rigidity or masses. Soft, non-tender. No signs of internal bleeding or trauma. Her fingers searched his pockets methodically, looking for clues. Seizure disorder, heart condition, drug overdose. The questions cycled through her mind like a diagnostic checklist. Left jacket pocket, empty. Right jacket pocket, her cold, stiff fingers closed around a phone. The latest model, sleek and expensive, with a case that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life before becoming homeless. The screen lit up at her touch, Face ID locked, but the emergency screen accessible. A single contact stared back at her. Father, not dad or a name. Just that formal, distant word that somehow carried immense weight even through the digital display. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was the moment of no return. Once she made this call, she'd be involved, visible, responsible. She'd be crossing from invisible homeless girl into someone's story, someone's emergency, someone's problem. And she'd learned the hard way over these 8 months that being in someone's story, especially wealthy people's stories, usually meant trouble. It meant questions she couldn't answer, scrutiny she couldn't withstand, attention she couldn't afford. But the boy's breathing was getting shallower with each passing second. His lips were darker now, almost purple in the flickering streetlight. His pulse was weakening beneath her fingers. The decision made itself. She pressed call, her hand trembling slightly as the line connected before the first ring even completed. Someone had been waiting by this phone, expecting this call or dreading it. Ethan. The voice that answered was sharp and commanding, cutting through the line like a blade. But underneath the authority she heard something else, an undertone of barely controlled worry that only a parent would recognize, a fear held in check by sheer force of will. "This isn't Ethan," Maya said quickly, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her racing heart. Years of talking to social workers and case managers and skeptical authority figures had taught her to project confidence even when she felt none. "My name is Maya. I found a boy collapsed on Riverside Drive near the old textile factory. I think he needs help immediately." This was the only number in his phone. The silence that followed stretched so long, Maya thought she'd lost the connection. She pulled the phone away from her ear to check, still connected, the timer ticking upward. 3 seconds, 5, 8. In the background she heard movement, urgent voices, the sharp sound of something metallic, keys. A gun? And then that sharp intake of breath, the kind that comes before a person makes a decision that will change everything. "Is he conscious?" the man demanded, his voice completely transformed into something harder, more dangerous. The worried father disappeared, replaced by something that made the hair on the back of Maya's neck stand up despite the cold. This was a man used to giving orders and having them followed without question, a man accustomed to control and power. "No, sir. He's breathing but unresponsive. His pulse is elevated, approximately 120 beats per minute, and thready. His skin is cold and clammy, despite the ambient temperature, and he's showing signs of cyanosis." Maya paused, her mind racing through differential diagnoses, pulling from memories of classroom lectures and clinical scenarios that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. "I have basic EMT training, and I think," she swallowed hard, committing to the assessment, "I think this might be insulin shock or some kind of blood sugar emergency. Does he have diabetes?" Another pause, shorter this time but loaded with calculation. She heard more sounds in the background now, car doors slamming, an engine roaring to life. shouted commands she couldn't quite make out. Do not move him. Do not call 911. Do not tell anyone else. Each word was delivered like a bullet, precise and deadly serious, brooking no argument or discussion. I'll be there in 12 minutes. Keep him warm and keep him breathing. Can you do that? Yes, but the call ended before she could finish, leaving Maya alone with an unconscious stranger, and a growing sense that she'd just stepped into something far bigger and more dangerous than a simple medical emergency. She looked down at the boy. Ethan, his father, had called him and made her decision. She shrugged off her jacket, thin and torn and utterly inadequate as it was, and laid it over his chest. It wouldn't do much against the relentless rain, but it was something, and right now something was all she had. She positioned herself between him and the worst of the wind, using her own body as a shield against the weather, feeling the cold soak through her thin hoodie within seconds, seeping into her skin like ice water. Her teeth started chattering almost immediately, her body already pushed to its limits, shaking violently now, but she stayed put. One hand monitored his pulse, still rapid, still thready, but steady. The other hovered near his face, checking his breathing every few seconds. She counted each exhale, each rise and fall of his chest, turning it into a rhythm, a meditation, something to focus on besides the cold, and the fear and the growing realization that she'd just changed the course of her life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The street light above them flickered intermittently, throwing strange dancing shadows across his pale face. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the city that never slept, traffic on the elevated highway, the lonely wail of a train horn, the bark of a dog somewhere in the darkness, the wail of sirens that made her tense instinctively before they faded in a different direction. Maya counted the minutes by the rhythm of his pulse against her fingers, each beat a small victory, proof he was still alive, still fighting. 8 minutes, 9, 10. She talked to him quietly, even though he couldn't hear her, because that's what Professor Martinez had taught them to do. You're going to be okay. Your dad's coming. Just hang on a little longer. Keep breathing for me. That's all you have to do. Just keep breathing. In and out. Nice and steady. At exactly 11 minutes, she heard them before she saw them, the distinctive purr of expensive engines, a sound completely out of place in this forgotten corner of the city where luxury never ventured. A convoy of 3 black luxury SUV appeared around the corner, moving with military precision, their headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights, and Maya knew with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same again. They didn't screech to a halt like in the movies. Instead, they glided to a stop with a kind of controlled power that spoke of drivers trained for far more than simply navigating traffic. The formation was deliberate, calculated, the lead vehicle positioned slightly forward, the third covering the rear, and the center vehicle, the one that mattered, stopping directly beside Maya and Ethan, with its passenger door aligned perfectly with where they huddled on the wet pavement. Maya instinctively shifted her body to shield Ethan more completely, her street-honed survival instincts screaming warnings she didn't fully understand. This wasn't an ambulance. This wasn't a normal rescue. This was something else entirely, something that operated by different rules than the world she knew. The center vehicle's door opened, and a man emerged who made Maya instinctively shrink back despite her determination to hold her ground. He was tall, easily 6'3", and imposing in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it cost more than most cars, somehow remaining pristine, despite the relentless rain that had soaked Maya to the bone. Not a drop seemed to touch him as he moved, as if even the weather recognized his authority and stepped aside. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from owning every room he entered, every space he occupied, every conversation he joined. This was a man who had never questioned his right to command, to decide, to control. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that looked like it had been broken once and healed perfectly, as if even his injuries refused to mar him permanently. But it was his eyes that truly captured Maya's attention. Dark, almost black in the dim streetlight, they swept across the scene with the precision of a military commander assessing a battlefield. In the space of 3 seconds, those eyes catalogued everything. The abandoned factory behind them, the empty street, the rain-slicked pavement. Maya's defensive posture, her soaked clothing, her trembling hands still monitoring Ethan's pulse, and finally his son's unconscious form. Something flickered across his face. Relief, terror, rage, love, all compressed into a single microsecond before his expression locked down into professional calm. But Maya had seen it, that crack in the armor, and it told her everything she needed to know. Beneath the intimidating exterior was a father terrified of losing his child. "Step back," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument as he knelt beside Ethan with surprising grace for a man his size. But there was something in his tone, not quite kind, but not cruel either. Efficient, controlled. A man used to crisis management who had learned long ago that emotion was a liability in emergencies. Maya shifted away but kept her hand near Ethan's wrist, unwilling to completely break contact until she was certain he was in capable hands. She watched as the man, Ethan's father, conducted his own rapid assessment with movements that spoke of extensive training and bitter experience. This wasn't his first time responding to his son's medical emergency. Probably not even his 20th. From inside his coat, he produced a small leather case, medical grade, compact, organized with the efficiency of someone who had assembled it personally. His fingers, steady and sure despite what must have been churning fear inside him, extracted a vial of clear liquid and a pre-filled syringe. Maya recognized the medication even before he spoke. "Glucagon," he said, more to himself than to her, his voice tight with focus as he uncapped the syringe with practiced efficiency. His blood sugar must have crashed during his run. Ethan has type 1 diabetes with complications, rapid fluctuations that don't follow normal patterns. Maya watched, fascinated despite her discomfort, as he administered the injection with the confidence of a medical professional. He knew exactly where to place it, the proper angle, the right pressure. This was ritual born of necessity. A father who had learned to be his son's first responder because waiting for help could mean death. The silence that followed felt endless, stretched thin with tension as they both watched for signs of response. Maya counted the seconds in her head, 15, 30, 45, her Emmett training telling her what to expect, but her inexperience making her doubt every calculation. How long before the glucagon took effect? How long before brain damage from prolonged hypoglycemia became a risk? How long before color began returning to Ethan's face like a photograph developing in slow motion? First his lips lost that terrifying blue tint, pink bleeding back into the tissue. Then his cheeks, the deathly pallor giving way to something closer to healthy circulation. His breathing deepened, became less shallow, more regular. His eyelids fluttered once, twice, before finally opening to reveal eyes that were exact copies of his father's, dark, intelligent, currently confused and disoriented but undeniably alive. "Dad?" Ethan mumbled, his voice slurred and weak, struggling to focus on the face above him. He tried to sit up, but his arms wouldn't cooperate, muscles still sluggish from the hypoglycemic episode. I thought I could make it home before." His father's hand pressed gently but firmly against his chest, keeping him down. "Don't move yet. Give the glucagon time to work." The words were stern, but Maya heard the tremor underneath them, the barely controlled emotion of a parent who had just pulled their child back from the edge. "We'll discuss your catastrophically poor judgment later. I forgot my emergency kit at school after basketball practice," Ethan continued, words coming easier now as his blood sugar climbed back toward normal ranges. His eyes slid closed again, exhausted. "Felt the drop during my run, but I was so close to home, and I thought I could make it. I didn't want to call you at work again. Didn't want you to worry again, and instead you nearly died in an alley," his father replied, voice hardening into something cold and cutting. "Brilliant strategy, Ethan. Truly exceptional thinking." The sarcasm was sharp enough to cut, but Maya heard the fear beneath it, the kind of anger that comes after terror, when a parent realizes how close they came to losing everything that matters. She'd seen it before, in the ER during her clinical rotations. Parents who yelled because screaming was easier than crying, who lashed out because falling apart wasn't an option. Together, they helped Ethan sit up slowly, carefully, watching for signs of dizziness or nausea. The boy was shaky but improving visibly with each passing moment, the glucagon working its small miracle, pulling him back from the edge of consciousness. He leaned heavily against his father, who supported him with one arm while pulling out his phone with the other. barking orders into it that Maya couldn't quite follow. As they prepared to move Ethan to the vehicle, Maya awkwardly began to step away, considering her good deed done and wanting to disappear back into invisibility before questions started. She'd learned long ago that drawing attention, especially from wealthy people with complicated problems, never ended well for girls like her. Better to fade back into the shadows, back to the streets that swallowed people whole and asked no questions. Wait. The single word stopped her as effectively as a physical barrier, freezing her mid-step. Ethan's father hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shouted or threatened, but something in that command made disobedience feel impossible. The tone carried absolute authority, the expectation of obedience so fundamental it didn't need emphasis. Maya turned slowly, warily, every instinct screaming at her to run. 2 of the security personnel had moved closer during the rescue, she realized with creeping unease. Not threateningly, exactly, but positioned in ways that blocked easy exit routes. She was suddenly, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was. Alone, homeless, with no one who would notice if she disappeared. But when Ethan's father turned to face her fully for the first time, giving her his complete attention, rather than the divided focus of a man saving his son, his expression wasn't threatening. It was assessing, calculating, reading her the way she imagined he read business competitors in boardrooms and complex negotiations. "What's your name?" he asked, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her appearance with uncomfortable precision. The torn jacket still lying over Ethan, soaked and useless now. The worn hoodie beneath it, thin enough to see through in places. The jeans that hadn't been properly washed in weeks, threadbare at the knees. The sneakers with holes that let in water and cold. The exhaustion etched into her features, the hunger that hollowed her cheeks, the wary distrust in her eyes. But also the determination, the competence she displayed, the moral courage it took to stop for a stranger. "Maya," she replied, then added reluctantly, "Maya-chan?" Giving her last name felt like handing over power, but something told her this man would find it out anyway, if he wanted to. Men like him, men with private medical kits and 3 vehicle security convoys, had resources she couldn't begin to imagine. "You said you have EMT training, Maya-chan." It wasn't quite a question, more a statement inviting confirmation. His tone had shifted slightly, become more measured, more considering. He was thinking, calculating, making decisions that involved her in ways she couldn't predict. "I was 6 months into my certification when—" Maya stopped, unwilling to explain her circumstances to this stranger, unwilling to admit just how far she'd fallen. "I know enough to help in emergencies. Basic assessment, airway management, CPR, recognizing symptoms of common medical crises." She lifted her chin slightly, pride flickering despite everything. "I know what I'm doing." "Yes, you do," he acknowledged, and something that might have been respect entered his voice. "You performed a competent assessment under difficult circumstances, made the correct diagnosis, and prioritized his immediate needs over your own comfort." His eyes dropped briefly to her shivering frame, cataloging the sacrifice she'd made. "That combination of medical knowledge and moral character is rare." He reached into his pocket, and Maya tensed instinctively, street reflexes expecting a weapon or a threat. But he only produced a business card, heavy stock paper that somehow remained perfectly crisp despite the rain. He extended it toward her, holding it between 2 fingers like an offering, a choice, a door opening onto something she couldn't quite see. Maya took the card reluctantly, her cold, numb fingers clumsy around the expensive cardstock. Even in the dim light, she could see it was embossed with silver lettering, Alexander Thorne, across the top in elegant script, and below it a single phone number. Nothing else. No company name, no address, no email. Just a name and a number, which somehow made it more intimidating than a full business card would have been. "I don't need money," Maya said quickly, her pride flaring hot in her chest, despite her desperate circumstances. 8 months on the streets hadn't broken her yet, hadn't reduced her to someone who accepted handouts from rich people who thought throwing money at problems solved them. "I didn't help him for a reward." Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Alexander replied flatly, with the certainty of someone who knew the world far better than she wanted to. "Not in this neighborhood. Not at this hour. Not for a stranger who clearly didn't belong here." His eyes held hers, dark and intense. Most people would have walked past, convinced themselves they hadn't seen anything, protected themselves from involvement. You didn't. That tells me something about who you are. He stepped closer, close enough that Maya had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with rain and something else. Stress, perhaps, or fear, not quite masked. That card isn't money. It's an opportunity. Call that number tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. exactly. I have a proposition for someone with your specific combination of medical knowledge, quick thinking, and demonstrable moral character. What kind of proposition? Maya asked suspiciously, her mind immediately jumping to the kind of offers homeless girls got from wealthy men, the kind that started with opportunity and ended with exploitation. But Alexander's expression didn't change, didn't show any hint of the predatory interest she'd learned to recognize and avoid. The kind that could change your circumstances entirely, he said simply. But that conversation requires time we don't have right now. He glanced back at Ethan, who was being carefully loaded into the SUV by the security team. My son needs proper medical attention and monitoring. Call the number tomorrow. Or don't. The choice is yours, Maya-chan. But I suspect you're smart enough to recognize a genuine opportunity when it's offered. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked toward the vehicle with that same confident stride, every movement controlled and purposeful. The security team moved with him in perfect synchronization, a choreography born of practice and discipline. Within seconds, all three SUVs had their doors closed, engines purring softly, ready to vanish back into the city as suddenly as they'd appeared. Alexander paused with his hand on the door handle, looking back at her one final time. "Thank you for saving my son's life," he said, and for just a moment, the mask cracked again, and she saw the father beneath the intimidating exterior. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, know that I'm in your debt for what you did tonight." Then he was inside, the door closing with a solid thunk of German engineering, and the convoy glided away into the night, taillights disappearing around the corner like red eyes winking out of existence. Maya stood alone on the rain-soaked street corner, the expensive business card growing damp in her hand, feeling impossibly heavy despite weighing nothing at all. Around her, the city continued its endless rhythm. Distant traffic, the drip of water from broken gutters, the rustle of trash blown by wind, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't just irrevocably altered the trajectory of her entire life. She looked down at the card, at the name embossed in silver, Alexander Thorne. Even the name sounded powerful, old money, the kind of man who shaped the world rather than being shaped by it. Part of her wanted to throw the card away right now, to drop it in the nearest puddle and watch the expensive cardstock dissolve into meaningless pulp, to avoid whatever complicated world this man represented, whatever strings might be attached to his proposition, whatever price would inevitably come due. She'd learned the hard way that nothing was ever truly free, especially from people with money and power. But the larger part, the part that was so tired of being cold and hungry and invisible, the part that still remembered who she'd been before the streets claimed her, the part that whispered maybe this is your chance, that part carefully tucked the card into her pocket, protecting it from the rain with her cupped hand. Something told her that accepting Alexander Thorne's opportunity would irrevocably change the course of her life. She just couldn't decide yet if that change would be her salvation or her destruction. Maya spent the night in a 24-hour laundromat, feeding quarters into the dryer just for the warmth while she debated her options. When morning came, she used the payphone outside the building to dial the number, her hand shaking from more than just the cold. A professional female voice answered immediately. "Mr. Thorne has been expecting your call. You have an appointment at 10 a.m. She rattled off an address in Westbridge Heights, the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, where Maya had never dared to venture. The mansion behind the iron gates made Maya feel like she'd stepped into a different universe. Manicured lawns stretched toward a limestone facade with more windows than she could count. A security guard checked her name against a list before waving her through to a circular driveway where Alexander Thorne waited at the entrance. "Miss Chan, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing her inside to a study that was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. "I'll be direct," Alexander began once they were seated. "Ethan's diabetes is more complicated than typical type. He experiences rapid and unpredictable blood sugar swings that have hospitalized him 17 times in the past 3 years. My previous medical assistant recently left for personal reasons, and I find myself in need of someone with your specific combination of skills. Maya's mind reeled at the salary figure he named. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. You want me to be what exactly? A nurse? A caretaker? A medical companion, Alexander corrected. Ethan is 16 and resents constant supervision, but his condition demands it. You would live here, monitor his glucose levels, accompany him to his activities, and ensure he follows his treatment protocols. In exchange, I'll also fund the completion of your EMT certification and provide room and board. Comment, Part 2 for the remaining story. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support keeps these stories coming, and it means the world to us.